Hi, I'm Catherine Birch, and I'm a part-time PhD student with the ICCM here at York St John University in the UK. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about my PhD research entitled Hidden Voices Toward a Trauma-Informed Framework of Community Music Practice. It is significant that trauma is becoming more widely recognised within the field of community music. In this respect, it's not surprising, therefore, to find a growth of community music projects in contexts where participants are known to have experienced trauma. For example, organisations like Musicians Without Borders and Music Action International. The development of trauma-informed frameworks of practice are significant to this work, but there is not yet an abundance of literature to support these developments, and not all projects working with trauma recognise a trauma-informed approach. Trauma-informed practice also seems to be connected specifically to working with known trauma survivors. For example, those who have lived experience of forced migration, women and children living in a refuge, ex-military, those in post-war conflict zones, or those within the criminal justice system. But when you consider the statistics surrounding trauma in the UK and beyond, the reality is that many more people have experienced trauma than may be visible. And to this end, trauma-informed approaches should be applied more widely on the assumption that there will likely be trauma survivors among the participants of a community music group, regardless of context. The word trauma comes from the Greek meaning wound or wounding. If to inform is to train or instruct in some specific subject or to educate, then to be trauma-informed is to be trained or educated in understanding what trauma is and the implications of its presence for the people that we work with. Whether visible or concealed, voiced or unspeakable, trauma can have long-lasting physiological, psychological, and emotional impacts. When working with trauma survivors, these impacts need to be both acknowledged and understood within a trauma-informed framework of practice. To be trauma-informed does not require a practitioner to engage directly with trauma narrative. Experience of trauma fragments and fractures narrative. Therefore, working with trauma necessitates a deep understanding of and sensitivity to its impacts. The central research question of my PhD is as follows. How can trauma-informed approaches be integrated into community music practice? The subsidiary questions that will support understanding of my central research question are: what contextual conditions need to be taken into consideration when designing specific trauma-informed frameworks? What are the limitations for practitioners working with trauma-informed approaches, and how can these be appropriately navigated? What are the ethical considerations of practitioners and researchers knowingly working with trauma? How can we avoid using others' suffering and pain to promote our own knowledge, understanding, and personal gain? How can silenced voices be appropriately represented? Is there a connection between trauma and voice? And if so, how can trauma-informed approaches better enable the voices and self-efficacy of participants? As a statement of proposed research, two main case studies will inform the qualitative research approach used for this PhD. Firstly, the York St John University Prison Partnership Project, and secondly, the Ethno Research Project. Using trauma-informed practice as a theoretical framework, each project will be examined with specific approaches to practice and pedagogy illuminated and unpacked. The Prison Partnership Project uses a particular approach resting on the 5 values of trauma-informed practice. These are safety, trust, collaboration, empowerment, and choice. Working with women within the criminal justice system in the UK. Ethno World folk music camps do not yet specifically adopt trauma-informed approaches to pedagogy and practice, and so offer an opportunity to investigate how notions of trauma, gender, and consent are perceived by the organisers and artistic leaders. This will enable a constructive dialogue to take place to develop understanding and offer a framework for practice that includes a deeper consideration of the potential needs of participants. Ethno-World also provides an opportunity to explore these issues within the context of cross-cultural musical exchange, highlighting social, cultural, economic, and philosophical differences that inform how these notions are seen, perceived, and understood. As a third, smaller case study, Music Action International, based in Manchester in the UK, works with trauma-informed approaches to practice with those with lived experience of forced migration. This project will potentially act as a bridge between the two main case studies, where it shares pedagogic similarity with the York St John Prison Partnership project, but has the social cultural considerations of Ethno-World. Alongside close examination of these projects, practitioners working both nationally and internationally will be interviewed, primarily those working with, or at least with an understanding of trauma-informed practice, but also those who do not consider those approaches, so as to understand contrasts in practice. The idea will be to not only highlight the similarities and differences in trauma-informed approaches, but give a sense of the wealth of context in which these approaches are being and can be used. So in responding to the idea that there needs to be a deep understanding of what change community music facilitators are trying to make and the underlying aims, assumptions, and processes behind it, I welcome discussion around the following questions or provocations. Firstly, how do I critically examine how trauma-informed approaches positively impact participants? Secondly, what responsibility to self-care do practitioners working within these frameworks need to consider, and how can firm boundary lines be drawn? And then thirdly, how can we work in ways in which the traumatic experience does not become the defining feature of the trauma survivor? I also welcome any questions or comments on the research rationale, research questions, statement of proposed research, and development of methodological approaches. As a fluid, not static process, I welcome discussion to strengthen and develop the existing iteration of my research. Thank you so much for listening.